There for Care is brought to you by CareScout with the goal of sharing real-life conversations about aging care. Views expressed on this program are the speaker's own. We do not provide medical, legal, tax, financial, or other professional advice. Always talk to your own professional advisors for advice tailored to your needs.
Welcome to There for Care, a podcast all about navigating aging care, whether for yourself or a loved one. My name is Katie Boyles, and today our guest is Noel Evans, a long-term care specialist and the host of the podcast, What's Your Plan? Today, we're going to be talking about the aging care continuum and what caregivers can do to help their loved ones at each stage. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be in studio. I love this. I love it. It's great.
Awesome. So you have been in this industry, in this space for over 18 years.
Yes.
But your journey with caregiving started before that.
Yes, it did.
Could you share a little bit about that experience?
Sure. And, when I went through my first caregiving experience of my uncle, who unfortunately in his 40s developed AIDS and died at age 49, I didn't know what caregiving was, right? I had no clue. And when I was at his house and he had caregivers coming in, private and from Jewish Family Services, I just knew that those people were there to give him love and take care of him, right? I didn't know about long-term care insurance. I didn't know about the cost. I had none of that capacity, but I knew that it was awfully tough. Mm-hmm. And, it is incredibly hard work. So that was my first introduction to caregiving, and it's really shaped my journey as a long-term care specialist.
So that is what guided you into this line?
Yeah. So my first career was in mortgage banking, and after 14 years of that, I decided to go in the insurance field at 2007. I started out at a John Hancock agency, and I really learned about long-term care as a practical way of funding caregiving there. I had a mentor who was amazing, and when you get into insurance, you kind of do a little bit of everything. So I did group and individual and all of that, and long-term care was the immediate click for me. Because of my uncle and my grandfather and grandmother and all these other stories I had, I realized that this was something I could build a career in, and that was rewarding and really valuable work.
Yes. And so when we talk about the aging care continuum, what does that mean and what does that entail for people going through it?
So I think, it probably means something different for everybody. Like most people want to start their receiving care at home, which we call aging in place. And then many people, they stay at home and then receive care at home, and they may pass at home. But then there's the journey into assisted living, senior living communities, where either they want to be around people or the level of care is such that they have to have, it's just too much to do at home, and it's so hard on the family. And then the third part of that continuum, what I feel is like going into memory care, where especially with Alzheimer's and dementia, it's dangerous sometimes for that person to get care in a different setting because of wandering and all of that. But I think what connects all three of those settings is that people don't know really where to start. Like if people hear continuum of care, their eyes might glaze over. But when you ask the right questions, where do you want to receive care? And most people say at home, right? Some people go into communities like Westminster Canterbury, where they move in and they're healthy and they have that community support. They can do outings and they have really nice dining. And then if they need care, it's on site. But I think the main piece of all this is asking the question, having that conversation. Where do you want to have care? Who do you want to have care for you? How are you going to pay for it? Those are kind of the main things I think that starts this journey.
And so you said that the continuum could be different for anyone.
Yeah.
And you just named a lot of different pieces in there.
Yeah.
So what are some of the challenges that people experience in this?
I think the first challenge is that we as a society don't talk about this, right? And so, of course, you have planners, right? You have the type A's who understand risk management, and they may have purchased a policy or they've met with an advisor. I think the biggest challenge is that most people just don't know where to start. They don't know what the resources are. They don't understand that Medicare doesn't pay for long-term care. That prevailing myth that drives all of us in the business a little crazy. But that's because we don't, I think, as a society, educate people properly until they're actually in a crisis. And why would anyone plan in a crisis? It causes so many detrimental, pieces like caregiver stress, caregiver burnout, sibling friction, sibling rivalry. So there's all these issues that I think are wrapped up in this whole thing that if you don't have the conversation early, you especially have no clue what to do.
And so what advice would you have for families that are stepping into this who they've never asked the questions? They don't know where to begin.
I mean, the first advice I would give, and Genworth has done so much work in this space, is having that conversation, sharing your wants and what you are maybe afraid of, and talking to people who may have been caregivers within your family circle, your work circle, your faith circle, whatever it might be. That's my biggest piece of advice. And I think the person who is receiving the care, and that's typically a parent or a grandparent, but it can certainly be a child, that person needs to share what they want, and they need to put it in writing, right? They need to discuss, like, what documents do I need? What does that look like at end of life of hospice and all those other components? So that's the first piece of advice I would give.
Yes. And you said in there is talking about it is the biggest piece,
Right.
and telling stories and finding the people who are sharing it.
Right.
Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah. I mean, I think in the past several years, I think this whole conversation is everywhere you look. So I think most people have a place to go. I mean, it's discussed on The Pit, right? They've done a whole arc on that. It's in film, it's in podcasting, like, which I do. And I think it's really, I think there's so many great places to go for support. I think your employer is one of them, right? ERGs, employee resource groups, which I know you have. Those are really fundamental places to start, because I think most people trust their employer. And even if your employer doesn't offer like group long-term care insurance, maybe they offer some type of external caregiving benefit or internal, I think that's a great place. But I really think your friends and other people who've been through this. That's the best way, I think, to begin this whole conversation.
And could you share a little bit about your podcast? Because I know
Sure.
on it, you also highlight caregivers and their stories.
I do. So when I started my podcast, I knew nothing about podcasting. I didn't know about the setup or whatever that entailed. And I was fortunate that in DC, DC Radio, which is part of the mayor's office, you can go in as a DC resident and pitch your idea, and they will support it if they like it. So I'll share this because it's important. My first meeting there was with 5 women, all women of color. And I had a plan, I had the title, I had everything, and I had a script, and I just kind of threw it out the window and I said, who in here has been a caregiver? And every hand went up. And basically, like 10 minutes later, they said, okay, we want to do this. And I had no idea. So what I try to do on my podcast is it's strictly educational and resource-based. I don't discuss products really, except for high level. It's not a sales podcast. I mention insurance, but really I mention the story, like caregiving story, long-term care. And when I first started, I had no idea what I was doing, And I had like Kathy Sikorsky on, who's a phenomenal caregiving authority. She's written numerous books, elder law attorney. I had other people in our industry who you probably know. And as it built out, and I'm now up to like 65 episodes, my main thing was like really promoting the storytelling piece of this. And that even if I'm talking to someone involved in legislation or hospice or end of life, I mean, because podcasting is really storytelling, right? So it's all connected. And that was my main goal, was to make it something that in 30 minutes, someone could listen to it and walk away with one key piece. And I always end my podcast with, what is something that inspires you or gives you hope about our caregiving crisis or long-term care crisis? And I think that is what we should be focusing on, because this is heavy stuff. Anyone who's been a caregiver knows that if they don't have the training and support, it can really ruin you. It can affect your employment. It can affect your relationships. So I try to end on a piece of hope. What do you see in the industry, or what do you feel that communities are doing better? How can legislation come into play? So that's what I try to do on my podcast.
So I want to flip it back on you right now.
Okay.
So what do you find inspiring in this industry right now?
Well, I think, first of all, most of us in this industry have empathy, and we want to help people. And I know in some industries that might sound like canned and corny, but I find that pretty much exclusively. Like everyone I'm talking to in our industry, from corporate to, anybody really, they are in this because they have a caregiving story. They've been a caregiver, or they had to write a check, or they watched their parents deal with caregiving for their grandparents. So I'm hopeful, because I really believe we're at that golden moment of caregiving and long-term care, where it's everywhere in the culture. It's not a looming crisis. It's been here for, I think, at least a decade. People are seeing that, they certainly can't afford to pay for this in most cases. Even if you have a high net worth, this is just like risk management. That's all long-term care insurance is. But if you just if you just try to promote it as a opportunity to buy insurance, you're never going to succeed in this. You have to build the storytelling in, and then we need people from all different companies and even competitors and to collaborate and get our stories out, the caregiving story out, which last year there was Bradley Cooper's Caregiving documentary on PBS. And I went to the premiere in DC, and it was amazing because there were so many people there, and all of them were just blown away by the caregivers in that story. One was 15 or 13 years old caring for his mother. Another was a young man caring for his wife who had a stroke, and she was, I think, in her 20s. And seeing that story out there gives people who are caregivers like a sense of, I'm not alone in this. Other people are doing this, and they're doing pretty well. So I think that gives people hope too.
Mm-hmm. And I think you hear often some people don't know they're a caregiver. Yeah. So the more you're seeing it out, totally, people can recognize that they're going through that situation as well.
Absolutely.
And so for the last thing to say, for the caregivers who are listening right now, what do you want to leave them with?
I want to leave them with the fact that companies like Genworth and CareScout are doing such incredible work in this space, that the industry has changed dramatically in the past 10 years, that there are lots of resources out there. And what I try to convey in my podcast is, I mean, whether if you're on Medicaid or you're a multimillionaire, the story is central, right? And of course, resources make this journey easier, but you're not alone, right? And I especially try to reach that market who doesn't have the resources and doesn't know where to start. And, within your zip code, you could plug in, Alzheimer's support groups, and they're everywhere, right? Or cancer support groups, caregiving support groups. And what I think is so important is that I think the moment has arrived where people are paying attention. Legislation is on the table, Tom Suozzi's WISH Act. There's caregiving benefits everywhere you look now. And I think all of that kind of wraps up the theme of like, you're not in this alone. It's going to be hard, but if you get the right resources, support, and if you find a way to fund it, then your life's going to be so much easier when you get that phone call at 3 a.m. in the morning, or your spouse or parent gets that medical diagnosis that we all dread.
Yes. And before we go, if somebody wanted to find your podcast, where could they do that?
So there's a number of ways. Right now, the best way is to go to DC Radio, which is 96.3 HD4. It's played during the week at 9:30 a.m. on a loop. So I have different episodes going on at different times. I'm about to move all my content to Spotify, Apple, YouTube. So if you put in what's your plan, Noel Evans, it will pop up. You'll get directed to my DC Radio, and then from there you can access the podcast.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It was amazing. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yes. And thank you for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe, and we will see you next time.